اللهم اجعل جمعنا هذا جمعا مرحوما واجعل تفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما ولا تجعل فينا ولا منا شقيا ولا محروما وتقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As I expected, this is the challenge, is that you want to hold sessions about the Quran in the month of the Quran, but it is the last 10 nights, and people are, as they should, putting in all of their efforts during the night to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So last year it was pretty bad turnout, because it was like at 12, and I learned like maybe 12 is too early. I thought maybe Dhuhr is good, but in any case, I hope it's recording, because a lot of people will need the recording, inshallah ta'ala. I plan to cover 3 surah today. So if you missed today, you're missing a lot. So let's get started, inshallah. We are in the last part of Juzu Amma. This is probably the 3rd last session. We probably have 2 more sessions, inshallah, because there's about 5 surah. If we finish 3 today, it will be 5 left. I don't want to squeeze 5 into one session. It doesn't give them justice. And I think it's nice to cover a few at a time so that they can sink in a little bit. If you cover too much, it's just, you'll start, thinking, oh, is this surah? And it gets messy, at least in my mind. So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. How are you? We just have to, can you just double check if everything is working fine? Because I think Fahid did it like remotely, but okay, everything is running smooth. And this is the clicker, it's not working. So inshallah ta'ala, we plan to cover, so today is the last day we will do this on a Sunday. We will go back to our Tuesday slot. I won't be harsh and say Tuesday before Eid, because probably none of you will show up. So inshallah, it will be the following Tuesday. And then we will have one more session. The last session is probably going to be April 30th. So there's going to be a Tuesday between April 30th and the first session after Ramadan that I'm going to be unfortunately traveling. So we will likely just have it April 30th. I really wanted to do it before May. I know that there are folks in the class that are traveling as well, end of May, or end of April, inshallah. So unfortunately, they miss out. But unless we, unless we decide to do it again on a Sunday, but then this place is busy on Sundays with Quran classes and whatnot. So for the meantime, inshallah, we're just going to set the class back to Tuesday. The other challenge we have is that Tuesday is now, it's not after Isha, because Isha is 9 something, right? So it's probably going to be between Maghrib and Isha. So the timing is going to be close to where we were before, but maybe shifted by 15, 20 minutes. Nonetheless, if it's between Maghrib and Isha, which I think it will be, inshallah, we'll pray Maghrib, we'll start the class, we'll pray Isha, and we'll go home, and we get the ajr of 2 Jama'ah prayers. Okay, so Juzu Amma, 4 clusters. We talked about the first 3 clusters. First cluster talks about the essential components of faith. Those are the first 3 surah. The next 5 surah talk about the concept of choice. They're not on the screen because I can't fit everything anymore. The 3rd cluster talked about the tools, the toolkit that you need, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides us. This is a divine toolkit. It's not something that you can learn on your own or come to conclusions on your own. These are tools that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taught us to be able to navigate the path towards Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. To simplify our no problem. The road has a lot of challenges, it has a lot of barriers, and so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala equips us with a toolkit that is useful. And then the last cluster, which contains the most amount of surah, is the cluster that we're focusing on now, that talks about the Islamic values, the values that Islam brings. And each surah, as we talked before, brings its one particular concept, and it talks about it. Like every surah in the Quran, every surah came with one main theme or one main point. Other surah that are longer obviously have a lot of ayat that elaborate, explain, provide examples, analogies, and so on around the main point. So if you take, for example, Surah Al-Mumtahina, and today, hopefully, inshallah, we will cover Surah Al-Kafirun. Both of them talk about how you deal with non-believers or disbelievers. But Surah Al-Mumtahina goes a little bit more detail. And Surah Al-Kafirun is very concise, to a small dose to talk about what is the core aspect of that whole interaction. And so you can see that, and then different surah, even though they talk about the main one particular theme, they will approach it from different perspectives and different angles. And we talked about that before, for example, in cluster 2, that talked about the concept of choice, how each surah talks about choice in a different light. So with that, inshallah, this is kind of a quick summary of the clusters. We are in the fourth cluster. Last week we finished Surah Al-Fil and Surah Quraysh. And today, inshallah ta'ala, we will continue on with Surah Al-Ma'un. Now, before we talk about Surah Al-Ma'un, remember, I kind of just brought another perspective last week, and I said that the last 10 surah of the Quran, they're all related to the Prophet ﷺ. They're directly addressing Quraysh and the Prophet ﷺ. And what tied them all together, we covered that last week a little bit. I'll just remind you where we are right now with respect to what we talked about. We talked about the two surahs we covered first last week out of the last 10. Al-Fil Quraysh talked about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's blessings on Quraysh and the people of Mecca. The next couple, and this is the answer of Sayyidina Ibrahim's dua that we talked about as well in Surah Al-Baqarah and Surah Ibrahim. رب اجعل هذا بلدا آمنا رب اجعل هذا البلد آمنا وارزق أهله من الثمرات من آمن منهم بالله واليوم الآخر. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, قال ومن كفر فأمتعه قليلا. So Sayyidina Ibrahim made dua for the believers in Mecca to have security, to be provided for, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala added ومن كفر. That even the disbelievers will get, even if they're in Mecca, they will also get that security, they will also get that provision, except in the hereafter. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says متعه قليلا ثم أضطره إلى عذاب النار وبئس المصير. So their punishment in the day of judgment. But in dunya, if they're in this, the dua of Sayyidina Ibrahim is to make this place secure. It's secure for everyone. It's secure for everyone. Everyone's provided for. And it's interesting because Mecca, and these are some of the signs that we need to reflect on. It's interesting because Mecca is barren land, like it's a desert, and to be provided for. If you live in a place where there's vegetation, where there's greenery, you can expect that you're going to have provision, growing out of the ground. But a desert, subhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed them, and we talked about those two surahs last week. This week, we talk about, who's worthy of security and provision. Everybody in Mecca. This is the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that they may show thanks and worship Him. فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. We talked about that last week. And so, are Quraysh worthy of these blessings? Are they worthy of security and provision? الَّذِي أَطْعَمَهُم مِّن جُوعٍ وَآمَنَهُم مِّن خَوْفٍ. They're enjoying the fruits of Sayyidina Ibrahim's dua, and they will enjoy it, but Surah Al-Ma'un talks about those who are not worthy. It exposes the unworthy children of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And then we're going to talk about the next surah after that, which is Al-Kawthar, which addresses the Prophet ﷺ directly. But of course, anything that addresses the Prophet ﷺ, there's something in it for us to learn as well. It talks to us. We'll talk about where that fits into kind of these last 10 surah as well. And then inshallah ta'ala, the goal is to end with Surah Al-Kafirun, and how that is included in the last 10. Okay, so Surah Al-Ma'un talks about the traits of a good person. We often hear that term, but this person's a good person. He's a good human being. She's a good human being. What does it mean to be good? Right? What does it mean to be good? A good person is someone who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in this surah. And a major part of it is obviously belief and helping others. And it's also a warning in the surah for that applies to everyone, including us, that if we don't take Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's commands seriously, and we perform them superficially, or we just do it to check the box, or we withhold aid or support, the supportive aid going to people, then we are subject to punishment. Wal-'iyadhu billah. So this is it's got an ayah that's very scary that I'm sure many of us have contemplated upon when we read it. So we're going to answer that question, inshallah ta'ala. The common question is, what is a good person? What it means to be a good person? What is the criteria or the measure that makes a person good? It's used a lot in society, and people use it. The question I have for people is, well, what defines good? What is the criteria for you to call somebody a good person? As Muslims, we believe that definitions for characteristics or people come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the one that defines, and we follow the definition, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala defines people. So Allah defines al-muttaqeen in the Quran. He defines ibadur rahman in the Quran. And He defines people that are not good and good in the Quran. And so this is our definition as Muslims. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expresses that very eloquently in this surah. So let's start reading together, inshallah ta'ala. Before we do, actually, I'll just say that the surah has 6 names. Surah Al-Ma'un is the common one. It's also referred to as Surah Ara'ayta, also Surah Ara'ayta Alladhi, as well as Surah Ad-Din, and Surah Al-Takdhib, and Surah Al-Yatim. So it's got different references to the surah. The overwhelming majority call it Surah Al-Ma'un. And we'll talk about what the word means shortly, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, when was this revealed? Majority is that it's Meccan. It's a Meccan surah that was revealed before Hijrah, and depicts the description or characteristics of the disbelievers from Quraysh. Again, I'm giving you the context tafseer there at the time, but also what it means for us, because it's not just for Quraysh. These ayat are not just revealed for those people, and it was 1400 years ago, and these are just stories, and no, this is for us as well. That's the one view, the majority view. There's another view that it's at least the second half of the surah is Madani, the first half is Meccan. It's a weaker opinion because the scholars who follow this opinion base it on the fact that the last few ayat, the second half of a very short surah, talk about a characteristic of hypocrisy. And hypocrites, verses about hypocrites were not revealed until they were in Medina. There were no hypocrites in Mecca. There was no incentive for you to be Muslim in Mecca. If you wanted to be Muslim, you suffered consequences. In hypocrites, hypocrisy, and that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses hypocrites in Medina. Now there's incentives, now there's a society, now there's those incentives and perks that you get if you're a Muslim, and so some people claimed they're Muslim, but they internally were not. Nonetheless, the majority did say that this is a Meccan surah, so we'll take that opinion, inshallah ta'ala. In the previous surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provided the people of Mecca of His favors and blessings. It was a positive reinforcement. Since that didn't work for many of the Quraysh, then this surah came with negative reinforcement, a warning. And the reality of the people, even after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's bounties, is just like that. Some people come with positive, and some people come with negative. It's just the nature of human beings. Everybody's got their preference. What gets them going, what gets them excited, what gets them in a state of taqwa. For me, I personally, not prefer, but I'm more driven by verses of punishment. Those scare me. and those get me more than the ayat of reward. Inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses all of us with the greatest of reward for those al-A'la. But what keeps me, inshallah, on the straight path are the warnings. So that some people are different and take things differently. Okay, so let's start reading, inshallah ta'ala. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أرأيت الذي يكذب بالدين فذلك الذي يدع اليتيم ولا يحض على طعام المسكين فويل للمصلين الذين هم عن صلاتهم ساهون الذين هم يراءون ويمنعون الماعون. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts the surah, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. Have you seen the one who yukadhib, comes from takdhib, bid-deen. And deen we talked about as, it is used for religion, but the general meaning is it's accountability. That's why Yawm ad-Din, the day of judgment, is the day of accountability. So, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ. And notice how أَلَمْ تَرَى in Surah Al-Fil, and this one is أَرَأَيْتَ. We'll talk about these two differences. أَرَأَيْتَ, did you see? أَلَمْ تَرَى, did you not see? And I think I talked about, maybe just brought this up last week very briefly. When the Prophet ﷺ was in a state of being distressed or overwhelmed, when the da'wah was not bringing very many results, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds him, didn't you see what we did with the people of the elephant? Right? Didn't you see? Versus ara'ayta is when stated during a position of strength. So did you not see is when the Prophet ﷺ is in a state of distress, and did you see when in a state of strength? Is one opinion about the differences of these two. Takdhib comes from the fact, again, this is not رَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يَكْفُرُ بِالدِّينِ or yushriku, it's yukadhibu. Yukadhibu comes from takdhib, and takdhib means that you know something is true, deep down inside you know, but you deny it. Why do you deny it? Because it doesn't fit a personal agenda. It's going to constrain you from doing what you want. It's not in your best interest, what you think is your best interest, even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has always given us things for our best interest. In any capacity, takdhib is something that deep down that you realized at one point, and maybe you don't realize it anymore, but at one point you knew that this was the truth and you suppressed it and you hide it and you justify yourself that it's not. And then when a human, the nature of humans is that when they start justifying things for themselves, they start believing their justifications, and it actually becomes a belief. So you say, well, this person really doesn't deep down inside know it, think it's the truth. Maybe they came to that point because they've lied to themselves so much, right? And so takdhib comes from that concept. It's different from kufr. Kufr is to disbelief in general, whether you actually know the truth or you don't, whether you know if something's right or you don't. That's the more general meaning, kufr. Takdhib is essentially talking about an atheist. رَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. So accountability or recompense is the word deen. What is interesting here also is Surah At-Teen. Anyone remember Surah At-Teen? The tafseer for Surah At-Teen we covered. I think was it before Ramadan? I think it was, right? How does it end? فَمَا يُكَذِّبُكَ بَعْدُ بِالدِّينِ. Right? فَمَا يُكَذِّبُكَ. What makes you, again, the word takdhib, بَعْدُ بِالدِّينِ. After, what arguments, after all of these arguments, what are they denying? Like you've seen the most powerful of arguments of Surah At-Teen, and they still, Allah's saying, what's making them deny it till this point? And now, they're still denying it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is bringing this ayah and saying, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ, like, these people are just not going to be convinced. And Surah Al-Tin talked about the lowest of lows. ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ السَّافِلِينَ. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing أَسْفَلَ السَّافِلِينَ right now. The lowest of lows are being addressed in the surah. And it's scary because there's an element of the surah that we engage in every day. And we don't want to be part of that. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. Okay. So أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ الدِّينَ فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُ الْيَتِيمَ. يَدُعُ comes from the word يَدُعُ. It comes from da'. And that is to be humiliated or mistreated. The term يَدُعُ, though, is to kind of like drive somebody towards something. يَوْمَ يُدَعُونَ إِلَى نَارِ جَهَنَّمَ دَعَى. When they will be driven to the hellfire, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says here, فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُ الْيَتِيمِ. So yatim is orphan, but remember what we talked about before is it's not orphan in just that specific context. The word yatim applies to anyone who requires social support, because an orphan lacks social support, right? This is why the Prophet ﷺ taught us to take care of the orphans. And if you hear the word orphan in the Quran, it's somebody who's lacking that social support. And if you hear the word miskeen in the Quran, it's somebody who lacks financial support. Okay? So there's a specific meaning of miskeen, yes, but it also is a general meaning of somebody who does lack that financial support. So in this surah, it's in this ayah, it's saying, and this person drives away the one who requires social support. The orphan, but in more general context, somebody who requires that support. وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. And يَحُضُّ comes from حَض, which is to encourage others to do good or to participate in goodness. And so they do not encourage others to support or feed or provide provision for al-miskeen, the one who requires that financial support. And so these are two characteristics of takdeeb. You've got somebody who rejects something, right? Rejects accountability, even though deep down inside they knew at one point, at least, that it's the truth. And they drive away and they do not support people who need both financial and social support. Now, does it mean that every atheist doesn't support the needy, doesn't support the orphans? No, that's not what the surah is saying. It's not saying every single person who does this does this. In the Quran, and I this is very clear throughout the whole Quran, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the boundaries, the two extremes, if you will, of what's ideal and what you want to avoid. So, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, the people who believe and do righteous good deeds. And then you have people who disbelieve and do terrible deeds. So we know where the first group's going to end up, it's clear. And we know where the second group's going to end up, it's clear. But what if you're somewhere in between? What if you believe but you harm people? Or what if you help people but you don't believe? Where do you fit in that spectrum? It's somewhere in the middle. This is up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to judge. What we know though is, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's many scenarios in the middle, and not every scenario is going to be addressed in the Quran. Allah gives you the goal. This is where you need to be. This is what you should avoid. And this is where this will lead you, and this is where this will lead you. And so our goal is to strive to be as close to that group as possible in every way, shape, or form. Okay? And avoid that group at all costs. And of course, there's a lot of gray in between where people fall. This is up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but Allah gave us the goalposts. And this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala defines success and failure in dunya and the hereafter in the Quran. So it's not every atheist will be somebody who drives away people who need social support and financial support. That's not what we're saying. That's not what the surah is saying. But it's explaining to you this is what you need to avoid from the belief perspective and the behavioral perspective. Okay? So any questions on that so far? So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing the negative, that means we need to be on the positive. So you need to be, and I need to be, part of the people who do not reject, don't have takdeeb, and don't drive away people who need support. Right? It's common sense. So that's the first three ayat. فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. This is the scary ayah for us that they're all apply to us. But it's scary because wail is a warning, and some scholars have said wail is a part of the hellfire is in the lowest depths. Hellfire's got 7 levels, and they have different names, and wail is one of them in the deepest part of Jahannam wal iyadu billah. That's an explanation by some scholars. Nonetheless, it's a warning. فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. We've heard wail in the Quran many times. وَيْلٌ لِلْمُطَفِّفِينَ وَوَيْلٌ لِلْكَافِرِينَ الظَّالِمِينَ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ. These are all people who reject, people who have double standards, people who deny, people who lie. But people who pray, فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. It's scary because what's this talking about? Why is وَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ? الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ. The two problems, and الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ. So the next two ayat, the next ayah after it as well, talks about two things: sahun and yura'un. This is the problem where people are being warned about. Sahun are people who are neglectful of their prayer. Somebody who's neglectful of their prayer, particularly the timing, and I'll explain to you why timing, but so Al-Ata ibn Dinar often is quoted in the explanation of this ayah. It says, Alhamdulillah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ. Is it ala or an? Or is it fi? Which one? An, right? What's the difference? That's the example, an and fi. الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ indicates that they are so heedless or neglectful of their actual prayer. But if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ, that means during their prayer and their concentration and their focus, they're heedless. So alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't say use fi, because we probably most of the time get distracted, at least at some point in the prayer. And although this is not to say, okay, as long as you pray on time, you don't have to worry about the quality of your prayer. We can spend hours talking about the quality and the importance of the quality of the prayer. The Prophet ﷺ described somebody who would pray but would only attain 50% or a quarter or a third or a tenth of their prayer based on their ability to concentrate. So somebody could do all of the actions, and we know the story of the man who did it, walked, finished the prayer, came to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet said, go back, for you have not prayed. And he did it again and again, 3 times, and then the Prophet showed him how to pray properly. The quality is extremely important. The warning here, according to Al-Ata ibn Dinar and others, have said that this is based on the actual prayer itself, that they're heedless and neglectful of coming to the prayer, not necessarily in the prayer. But others have expressed both the prayer and the quality of the prayer, which is what I would prefer to take, because at the end of the day, if you just do the steps and check the box, you will get سقطت الفريضة, right? So yes, you will get the fact that you've accomplished the obligation, but did you get the actual reward of the prayer? Probably not. So you've done all of these tarawih and all of this qiyam and all these fara'id and all of Ramadan, and I wasn't focused. Right? خسارة والله. That'd be a big loss. Nonetheless, this is talking about somebody who's neglectful of the relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At the end of the day, salah is the relationship with Allah. And so if you and I don't take that relationship, the timing of that relationship as sacred, this is my meeting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm not going to be heedless. I'm going to take it seriously. When we have appointments at work or with other people at meetings or school or whatever, وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى وَلَا تَشْبِهُ. If you have a meeting with somebody of great importance in society, you're going to be probably coming to that meeting looking good, smelling good, on time, probably early even, waiting, so that you can make sure that you're representing yourself the best way. So, salah is meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's sad, wallahi. Sometimes we neglect the fact that we are actually meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the one who loves to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in dunya, i.e. pray on time and in the best form, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves to meet them hereafter. So this is talking about a symbol of the relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in praying, and also includes quality and focus. Okay? So sa'hun means neglectful, and alladhina hum yura'un. Yura'un is those who pray to show off. They don't do it for Allah, but they do it for people to see. And this is to gain status or recognition from others and applause. And so it's the opposite of sincerity. I also like to take it as a more general understanding as well. الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ. So salah comes from sila, which is a connection, a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So one of it is neglectful, but the other one is yura'un, so they're doing it for personal gain. So they show that they have closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're people of Allah, they're people of the masjid, they're people of khair, and they're doing all this work, and they're doing it for a personal agenda, for status or gain or likes or followers or whatever. And it's very scary, wallahi. It is. Shaitan creeps in and throws these things in our intentions and says, you're doing all this good work, look at the recognition you're getting, look at people are seeing you as a leader. And it's scary, you have to fight that off. So الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَهُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ وَيَمْنَعُونَ الْمَعُونَ. And so يَمْنَعُونَ is to basically withhold, and ma'un comes from aun. Aun is to aid or help. So when you offer aid or help to someone, is aun, and ma'un comes from that. So somebody who basically stops aid or help that's being provided for somebody who needs it, is who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing here. And we know that Quraysh, it fits this description very well. But if you look at the description of a good person, let's go back to that definition. What is a good person? A good person in the surah is a person who has a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're not sahun, and they're not yura'un in their prayers. And they do not stop, help, or aid when it goes to somebody, or it's being offered to somebody. This is the definition of a good person, according to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, you go into a lot of details in other surah, but these shorter, smaller surah are to give you the main point. So the warning, fawaid, applies to both these two characteristics, if somebody has them. That relationship with Allah through their prayer, and for the relationship with other people. They're both acts of worship. They're both acts of worship. But one happens to be with Allah directly, it's your one-on-one. Right? Whether I pray with khushu' or don't, that doesn't harm you, benefit you. Right? It means nothing to you. It doesn't make a difference. But ma'un is the worship that has to do with helping other people. So that does make a difference to others. So there's two relationships here that this surah is talking about. And the good person that Allah is describing in the surah is good at both. Has that relationship with Allah and does not stop aid and help from going. If this was our mentality, that this is what it takes to be a good person, a good Muslim, I think society would change. Right now, the definition of a good person, you ask most people, what would people say? Right? So people who pray, people go to the masjid. It's good. No, these are, you have to. This is part of being good, right? But is that it? So, I was in a city, I won't mention what city. And mashallah, a brother first row in every salah, all 5 prayers, almost all 5 prayers. He lived right next to the masjid, but there was a breakout in and may Allah protect us all, bed bugs in an apartment building. And they did analysis, and the source of the bed bugs was this person's place. So, harmed everybody else. It was on time, every prayer. What's a good person? Definitely praying and doing all these things is good, but if you neglect the rights of other people, the help of other people, then I'll tell you that's probably not a good person. And vice versa. You're always there for people, you're sacrificing everything on the line for them, but you don't have a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's also not a good person. Okay? Based on the Quranic definition, not my definition, that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describing. So, in other words, your salah is not going to make up for mistreating others, and your excellent treatment of others is not going to make up for your salah. These are the boundaries that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is drawing. Now, if you fall or I fall into somewhere in the middle, that's up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to obviously deal with us with His mercy, not with His just. Otherwise, we'd all be doomed. But again, this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is drawing. This is the definition of what a good person is, and somebody who, again, the last ayah is not saying somebody who takes care of orphans or takes care of masakin. This is الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَوْنَ وَيَمْنَعُونَ الْمَاعُونَ. Somebody who stops. It takes another level type of person to, if you can't afford to help masakin, if you can't afford to help orphans, you can't afford it. But don't stop khair from going to these people. That's what this ayah is saying. It's not saying that wail or a warning for those who don't help. These people who need all these types of support. Some of us can't. Some of us, not every person, on earth will be able to support someone. But at least don't stop the support. Don't withhold it. Don't put barriers. That's the warning where it's coming to. Because it does take another kind of level of type of person. It's just human decency to not and you just think about what's happening in Gaza, and nothing is going through. And all these trucks are going to, they're going from our very own Muslim countries, going to Israel directly with no slowing down, no barriers, nothing. Very simple, and you just can't get one truck into Gaza. SubhanAllah. الذين هم يراءون ويمنعون الماعون. Okay, I'll actually end with a hadith. I like this hadith. من هو المفلس? Does anyone know the definition of al-muflis? The one who's bankrupt? Yeah, very good. So the Prophet ﷺ asked the Sahaba, من المفلس? Who is the one who's bankrupt? And they answered and they said, المفلس ما له درهم فينا ولا دينار. The person doesn't have 1 dirham or even a dinar amongst us. And the Prophet ﷺ said, المفلس فينا من يأتي يوم القيامة بصلاة وصيام وزكاة وحج ويأتي وقد ضرب هذا وشتم هذا وأكل مال هذا وهتك عرض هذا. The person will come on the day of judgment with prayers and fasting and zakah and hajj, but they've harmed this person, and they've taken, they've attacked someone's integrity or dignity. They've taken this person's rights. فَيُؤْخَذُ هَذَا مِنْ حَسَنَاتِهِ. So on that day of judgment, what makes that person bankrupt is that person, their deeds, their deeds on their scale will be taken away and will be given to those who that person harmed. And so when those deeds run out, they become bankrupt. But then the person looks and there's still a lineup of people that want their rights because they've been wronged. And the malaika say, oh Allah, there's no more good deeds for this person to give away to those people who they harmed. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands the angels to take from the people's bad deeds and to put them onto this person. Because he has nothing left, he's muflis. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from that. But this hadith talks about this concept of not harming others and not being a barrier to khair and aid. Aid in the most general terms. It's not just food trucks, and it's any help, right? Somebody needs help and you put in something to sway somebody from helping them. Even if it's a word. SubhanAllah, even sometimes a word we say, oh, maybe that person did something bad in the past and it's not worthy of that help. You throw something in that causes somebody to stop. I'm not going to go help this person. Why? Right? So it's not just on the grand scheme of things is what I'm saying. It could be as simple as a word that stops khair from happening. May Allah protect us from that. Any questions before we move on? Yes. So this is why some scholars say the first half is Meccan, second half is Madani. But the overwhelming do say it's Meccan. And they say it's Meccan because just before Hijrah, it depicted, obviously the believers at the time, which were a few hundred, this ayah was very scary for them, right? So if you take the opinion that it's Meccan, which is the predominant opinion, so it's not just to address the Quraysh, but also people, even the believers at the time. So not necessarily only for people who disbelieved. Any other questions? Okay. So let's move on, inshallah ta'ala, to Surah Al-Kawthar, the shortest surah in the Mus'haf. And Surah Al-Kawthar, Kawthar means the abundance, talks about the moral response to mockery and mistreatment of others. How do you respond to somebody who attacks you? Right? So Surah Al-Kawthar, it's called Surah Al-Kawthar in most Tafseer, and it's also called Surah Al-Nahr as well. Now, there's a couple of kind of, most scholars, interpreters of the Quran say it is a Meccan surah. Some say it's Madani. And the reason why some of them say Madani is that the Prophet ﷺ was at one point kind of sitting amongst some of the Sahaba, and he kind of drowsed off in sleep and then woke up. And he said to them that a surah was revealed upon me, and they asked about it, and he said it was Surah Al-Kawthar. He read it, it's very short. And then they asked him, what's Al-Kawthar? And the Prophet ﷺ responded and said, this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made for me a river basically in paradise. So this incident, scholars say it happened in Medina, so it's, they're saying it's Madani. So I usually kind of give you where the surah is, majority would say, and sometimes where others say, what other scholars say it is, and what their evidence is. Now, again, I follow majority opinion. I'm not a mufassir, so I'm not a scholar of tafsir, so I follow what the scholars say. Sometimes, if you take ulum al-Quran, the Prophet ﷺ would talk about ayat in Medina, but they were revealed in Mecca. There is some opinion that ayat, even though they were revealed from before, and Jibreel came with them again, it's not just because he came with them in Medina, it doesn't mean they weren't revealed in Mecca before, and it was just a reminder. And that's just another opinion. Wallahu a'lam wa ahkam. This happened because of an incident. So Asbab al-Nuzul, some of the scholars say, is tied to an incident where the Prophet ﷺ, we know that he had Al-Qasim and he had Ibrahim, and they both died in their infancy, his two sons. And the Prophet ﷺ had 4 daughters. And this incident talks about a particular individual that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually doesn't name. Does anybody know who the person is, who this is addressing to, by the way? Surah Al-Kawthar. Al-As ibn Wa'il. Okay, so he's not even mentioned for a reason. So Al-As ibn Wa'il would be approached that the Prophet ﷺ is saying this and he's proclaiming this and that. and he would say, leave him, he's abtar. Abtar meaning he doesn't have any male offspring. When he dies, he will not be remembered. His lineage is cut off. He has no boys, and because males are what passed down your name down in back in Arabia at the time, and you were recognized by your forefathers, right? Your lineage. And so if you don't have boys, at the time, you're not going to be remembered after a generation or two. And this is what Al-As bin Wa'il said. And you you probably never heard of Al-As bin Wa'il before, and this is the irony of this surah. That who's the one who was cut off? Who is the one whose lineage or his legacy didn't move forward? Not the Prophet ﷺ, because we know that the Prophet ﷺ, we'll talk about that in more detail, but Al-As bin Wa'il, the only reason why people know him, obviously if you do the tafsir of the surah, but he did have children, and one of them was a companion of the Prophet ﷺ. Anyone know who that is? So Al-As ibn Wa'il. So who is somebody ibn Al-As? Amr ibn Al-As. So that helps trigger the memory, right? So Amr ibn Al-As radiallahu anhu became Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ. He was one of his children. Al-As ibn Wa'il did have sons and daughters, and this is the irony of everything. Okay, so in our context, what is this surah talking about? Yes, Al-Kawthar is promised to the Prophet ﷺ. And we'll read the surah as if it's revealed to the Prophet ﷺ, but what does it mean for us? This is how we should respond to somebody who puts us down or mocks us. Just like Al-As ibn Wa'il mocked the Prophet ﷺ for not having a lineage. He's going to be cut off. Don't worry about him. He's worthless, etc., etc. It's not the case. So let's read it together, and we'll do the tafsir, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر. Very, very, very careful. It's not fasalli, it's fasalli. Fasalli. There's a kasra, there's no ya, right? So it's not fasalli li rabbika wanhar. It's fasalli. Fasalli. Very short. Okay? Fasalli li rabbika wanhar. Inna shani'aka huwa al-abtar. Okay. So the surah talks about, so we'll talk about, the context of the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Allah is promising the Prophet ﷺ al-Kawthar. Al-Kawthar comes from the word kathura. Kathura means a lot or in abundance. And al-Kawthar in Arabic, if you have, if you have a word and you have the term of the word in like faw'al, right? So fa'al or faw'al. Faw'al means the best there is of that fi'l. So kathur is abundance. Kawthar is the best of abundance. So it means both the quality and the quantity. Okay? It's not, kathur means just a lot, but kawthar means it is the highest of quality at the highest of quantity. Okay? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the Prophet ﷺ, Inna, we are granting you al-Kawthar. The best there is of quality and quantity. فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرْ. Okay, so I'm just thinking, I'm debating, maybe I'll explain both at the same time, the context and our context as well. When somebody puts you down, know that 100% certainty that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't agree. He doesn't agree. When somebody, even if that person, even if you feel like you're not a good person, somebody puts you down, that is an act of oppression against you. Know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not like that act of oppression, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala haram al-dhulm ala nafsi. Even Allah, let's reflect on this. Allah forbade oppression on himself. On himself. He is under, subhanahu wa ta'ala, under no obligation to put himself under a boundary. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not, He has haram al-dhulm an nafs. He will not, He has abandoned, He will never be oppressive to anyone, and He's put that on Himself, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so if somebody says something to you or does something that harms you, remember Allah doesn't agree. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We have elevated the honor of Bani Adam. So you and I as Bani Adam, the children of Adam, we are honored by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just for the mere fact that we are humans. And that being a human comes with an honor that Allah gave to every human. So if somebody harms you or says something to you, know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not agree with this. And this is very important for us to internalize. Because I'm sure we all get harmed by somebody, whether it's a word that's said or an action being said, by people we know and people we don't know, people we love and people we hate. Right? People will say these things to us. So know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying to us, just like the Prophet ﷺ was being called abtar, something that was harming him, right? He was being told things that were harmful to him. And so when we are harmed, remember Allah has promised Al-Kawthar, abundance in quality and quantity. Before we actually respond, let's internalize that. This is the practice of the surah. Internalize what is being done to you before you respond. Sometimes it's hard because we get emotional and we start saying things and reacting just, as a fire. This is why it's good to calm down, go make wudu, sit down, lay down, drink water, turn that fire off so that you can act reasonably and rationally. And remember that internalize first before you react. And so when somebody says something to you that's harmful, internalize, say, Allah doesn't agree with this. He has promised Al-Kawthar. He has promised Al-Kawthar. Inna a'taynak Al-Kawthar. It's a promise that if I'm harmed, I'm going to take that for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm going to internalize that. I'm not going to respond back. How am I going to respond? فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرْ. Fasalli is sila, is to connect with Allah. It's more than just the prayer. It's a reminder that if somebody does that to you, get closer to your Lord. Establish that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the first thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, is that I've given you the Kawthar. This should be enough to push us to whatever was said and done, put that to the side. It's not going to harm me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised me the best of things in quality and quantity. And how do I respond? I respond by worshipping and connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the first part, fasalli. Right? Fasalli li rabbika wanhar. And nahr means slaughter. Now, it doesn't mean slaughter the person who put you down. It's not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying. It's slaughtering is an expression, wanhar is to slaughter cattle and livestock and distribute the meat to help other people. Okay, so it's a symbol of helping other people and giving people who need something, particularly provision. So the two types of worship: connection with Allah, again, just like the last surah, and helping others. So these are acts of worship, one towards Allah, one towards the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So continue to build your relationship with Allah. If people put you down and harm you, focus on your relationship with Allah and your relationship with people. What does it mean to have, so what does this have to do then? What does that have to do with, I have to help people and somebody's harming me? Because oftentimes, when somebody does something that upsets us or harms us, the human reaction, the raw human reaction is to say what? I'm done. I don't want this. You know what? There's too much headache in this masjid. I'm not going to work with them. I'm going to do my own thing. This happens all the time. I'm going to just do, there's a difference if you react this way because people are stopping khair and you want the khair to thrive, or you're doing it as a reaction. And if it's a reaction, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that establish a relationship with Him and help others. And continue to support and do your job. Don't let that state of being perturbed by people, by how they act and react towards you, change who you are. Don't let that change who you are. Allah's promised you al-Kawthar. Keep going. Keep going. Yeah, so think that when somebody says something, when somebody mistreats you, don't mistreat them back. Don't say something back. Internalize and say, what goes around comes around. What goes around comes around. We'll see in the last ayah, what goes around comes around. Don't worry. People who do evil upon people harm people, they eventually get the treatment. There's actually a very famous story. A person in one of the countries I won't mention, he was an older gentleman, and people saw his son beating him up. The son's beating up the father, and the father is basically quiet. He's just letting his son beat him up. And then afterwards, people rushed him saying, what are you doing? Like, you're letting your son do this to you? Like, what kind of son is this? And the man said, well, I used to do that to my own father. I used to do it to my own father. What goes around comes around. SubhanAllah. And if it doesn't come around in this dunya, it'll come in the hereafter. Right? So, don't worry, people will harm you. Just internalize and say, I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing. I'm going to continue working on my relationship with Allah. I'm going to continue serving others and sacrificing for them. And I'm not going to retaliate. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told me that if, He's promised me something. It's something much greater than what I will get in retaliation or mistreating other people. And this is how the Prophet ﷺ dealt with Quraysh in all his life. The Prophet ﷺ never retaliated. People would throw guts on him, people would ridicule him, would mock him, would call him things. SubhanAllah, he was known as Sadiq al-Amin, and afterwards they called him a liar. Like, they wanted to get him, to where it hurts. Didn't retaliate. Something that amazes me about the Prophet ﷺ, and it's a goal that we should all try to attain, and I can't do it yet. I can't. The Prophet ﷺ never got angry, ever, for him. He never got angry for himself. All of his anger is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If somebody did something against him personally, he never got angry. If somebody did something that was against Allah is when he got angry. When somebody mistreated others or took their rights, that's when he got angry. But if to him, he never got angry. It's incredible if you think about it. It's a goal we should all be trying to attain. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Okay, we'll end with the last ayah, inshallah. Inna shani'aka huwa al-abtar. Shani'aka means a person who is your enemy. It denotes somebody who has hatred towards you or spite, and will try to harm you in one way, shape, or form. In this case, Al-As ibn Wa'il was blinded by the hatred of the Prophet ﷺ, and so he said, "Inna shani'aka." He called him abtar. He said, your lineage is going, don't worry, leave him alone. He has no sons to carry on his lineage and his legacy. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, Inna shani'aka huwa al-abtar. Your enemy is the one that's going to be cut off, not you. And subhanAllah, this is the irony that you don't even know about Al-As ibn Wa'il. His name's not even mentioned in the surah, because had it been mentioned, his legacy would have lived on. Yeah.
But his son did become the governor of Egypt and so on.
His son. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't mistreat people. I mean, because your father or your mother or your brother or your son was a bad person, that doesn't, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is fair and just, right? His father, though, was an evil person. But his son, you're talking about his son carrying his lineage? He didn't carry his lineage. His lineage was kufr. His legacy was kufr. It was not Islam. He didn't become Muslim. If I was practicing something, I wanted my kids to practice it so that it can go on. That is a legacy.
But the context was that if you don't have a son, that is with your lineage, in the biological sense, will not continue.
Right.
But if that is the context, then his lineage did continue.
Right, but this is what I'm saying, it's not the context. Because legacy, the Prophet didn't have sons that lived on. This is the irony of it, is that the Prophet ﷺ, his lineage, his legacy, I see lineage, but I meant legacy. His legacy, ﷺ, is still the Day of Judgment. The most common name in the world is Muhammad. By far, number one name, top on the list, is Muhammad. 1445 years later, alayhi salatu salam, and yes, our state as an ummah is something to cry over, but at least 7.5 billion out of 8 billion, if I throw a number out of the top of my head, know who Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is, right? They know him. You could not cut that off. His legacy thrived down forever, and Al-As bin Wa'il's legacy, nobody knows anything about. Right? So it's not, this would say it's not biological. Al-As meant it as biological. Don't worry, because he has no biology, he's going to be forgotten. And Allah is saying, no, it has nothing to do with biology. Your legacy is not based on who you have, because who you have is not up to you. Who you have, your children are not up to you. That's provision given to you by Allah. Your legacy that you leave, and of course everything is from Allah, success is from Allah. Your legacy that you leave is based on the work you've done, your sincerity. I often mention this when I talk about Hadith al-Nawawiyya. Imam al-Nawawi, did Imam al-Nawawi have any children? No, he actually didn't get married. He died in his 40s, radiyallahu anhu, rahimahullah. He died in his mid-40s. You know the volume of Islamic knowledge that came from him, and particularly al-Hadith al-Nawawiyya, the 40 Nawawi hadiths that everybody knows about? You know how many scholars came up with 40 ahadith? But why Nawawi? Why is it that Nawawi is the most famous ones? To give us a comprehensive meaning of Islam. ذَلِكَ فَضْلُ اللَّهِ يُؤْتِيهِ مَن يَشَاءُ. This is the Allah, could be sincerity, could be something he did. Rahimahullah, we don't know, but we know that his legacy has lived on. So if you want, and I want our legacy, which we all do, nobody, this is human nature, you want legacy to move on, and people think it's through children. And it's, the hadith, everything is cut off when you die except for 3 things. Waladun salih yad'u lah. People attribute waladun salih as your own child. Who said? What if you didn't have children? It's a child that makes dua for you. It could be somebody who you helped. It could be somebody who you taught Quran. It could be many things. And that person is salih, grows up to be salih, and makes dua for you. It doesn't have to be, this is the whole point of the surah. It's not biological. And it's to shift our understanding. It's that lineage and legacy is not passed down through that. Wallahu a'lam. Does that make sense? Yes. Sahih. And that's a beautiful point as well. Your own son is following somebody else. Sahih. Jazakumullah khair. Any questions? I will say also very quickly before I don't want to take too much time because we have one more surah, and Surah Al-Kafirun shouldn't be too long, inshallah. Notice how the Prophet was mocked for something he had no control over, right? We should never ever mock somebody for something that they have. We shouldn't mock people in general, but specifically for something they have no control over. Now you may mock somebody for an action they've done. Should never mock, because had Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not guided you and me, we may have done the same thing or even worse. Right? That's why we don't put people down. But notice how in this particular context, the Prophet was being put down for something he had no control over. And this is what racism is. Right? This is what discrimination is. It's you're being picked on for your color, your skin, or your lineage, or where you live, or the language you speak, how you look. This is what race is. This is why it's horrible. And the Prophet ﷺ did also actually even give a warning for mocking people even in their actions. So if mocking actions is bad, then for sure mocking something that somebody can't control is even worse. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Man ayyara akhahu bishurb al-khamri, ibtalahu Allahu qabla mawtihi bishurbiha." Kind of scary. Whoever ayyara is like to taunt or to put down or mock somebody for drinking alcohol. The hadith says, and I don't know about the authenticity of the hadith, to be honest, but the hadith says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will test them with that very action that they mocked people over. And we probably can attest to that, right? We put somebody down for doing something, and then you come at a crossroads where, uh-oh. You may not think, uh-oh, but you think, I might do it this time. So be careful not to put people down for what they've done, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might test us. Any questions before we go on, inshallah, to the last surah of the day? Yes? Yeah, so when it crosses your mind, you should think about the action, not the person, right? That's the ideal is, again, easier said than done. I'm not sitting here claiming I do this. Like, we all struggle, right? We all struggle. But when you come across something that somebody's doing, instead of saying, oh, look at these people, they're eating and they're missing out on, Ramadan, it's too bad for them, right? I'm enjoying Ramadan, I'm getting close to Allah. Think to yourself and say, you know what? Alhamdulillah alladhi hadana li hada wa ma kunna linahtadiya lawla an hadana Allah. Like, alhamdulillah that Allah guided us to this, and if it wasn't for Allah, we wouldn't have been guided. So I can look down on someone's actions, right? These are bad actions. These are upsetting Allah. That should cross our mind. But to equate people and say these people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He left us for our own selves for even tarfat ayn, that's why we make the dua, don't leave us to ourselves for even a blink of an eye, that we would deviate. Wallahi, the positions could have been easily switched. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us the blessing of belief. What makes us, now we claim ourselves better than other people, or we put ourselves on a higher pedestal and saying, oh, look what they're doing, look what they're doing, oh, look at this. Who put you up there? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's guidance is what you have. And Allah could easily take that from you and give it to that person. And it could be very easily reversed. So just be thankful. And when it crosses your mind, just remind yourself of that, inshallah. You're saying, I have nothing to do with being guided. This is all Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I have no control of guidance. Yes?
What is the line between critique and mocking?
So mocking is, again, you're attacking the individual or the person, right? The action is what you need to criticize, right?
For example, in the current context, if I'm not too controversial about Biden, and people say that what he is doing kind of a thing. So we don't find where is the line, we are criticizing him and his action, those things can be extra worse.
So I think in this particular case, I think people are mocking because they've spoken to Biden. And if you're talking to somebody to stop something, and people have, and they still don't budge, and it's so obvious, it's staring them right in the face, and the whole world knows, and it's you can bring up mock, not for the sense that you're mocking him so that, again, from the spiritual sense. You're not mocking him to put yourself higher. You're mocking him because you're saying, this has come to a point where you have absolutely, it's the truth. And you know very well what's happening. And we tried different ways and it's not working with you. So mockery is where it's going to come at if you're going to change. Because that's how, unfortunately, people who know very well the truth and avoid it, some people come this way. Some people come this way. So your approach, though, is internalized. How do you internalize that mocking? Do you mock it because you want to put people down and put yourself up? Right? And I'll be honest, we can look at, people who are bought by dollars to take decisions. But it could be on a smaller scale where somebody says to us something and we might sell ourselves or sell our principles for something. It doesn't have to be dollar for action. Like, stand with the Zionists, here's $1 million. It could be something as simple as, do this for me, and you'll be in good shape. We'll take care of you. And what you're asked to do is not very principled. Just think that I could be in a position like that. Not maybe Biden's position, but a position like that.
Very struggle, for example, even if forget about the Biden, even in the Muslim countries, if you criticize any action by one of the rulers there, it is considered pretty much a kind of a blasphemy kind of thing that how can you are not criticizing this action, you are defaming this national institution, this monarch or this king or this ruler, and prison is the place that you belong to.
Yeah, no, on the communal, so again, there's difference between communal and personal and individual. Communal is when the community is being impacted, and this person is not budging, sees the truth, doesn't risks their morals and their principles to do what they want to do, then yeah, I think they need to be put in you need to address them and even mock them at a point. Sayyidina Nuh did that, right? In تسخروا منا فإنا نسخر منكم كما تسخرون. You mocking us because he was building the ark in a desert, saying, "Where you're building a ship," and he responded, "You're putting us down. We will put you down, just like you're doing it to us." It's a position now of it's different because now it's a position of strength. You're trying to gain strength for haqq. It's not for personal gain or for you to feel better than someone or to put somebody down. There's haqq now involved. Okay. I'm looking at the time now, and I know everyone's tired, and they've had a long night, and there's another odd night coming up, inshallah. So I will not go through Surah Al-Kafirun today. I really wanted to, but I can't do more than 2 more classes. So it's going to be crunched in with next week, inshallah. So if you guys, let's take a vote. Would you rather do Surah Al-Kafirun in about 15 minutes, or push it to next week when it's after Ramadan and we might potentially finish a little bit later in the night, so 9:30, 10 o'clock. So hands up for now. I won't embarrass myself anymore. Yeah, khair, inshallah. طيب. Jazakum Allah khair. I don't have an attendance sheet, but can we please, Jazakum khair best. So that's we'll get one, inshallah, and then please make sure you sign in. With that, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept your Ramadan, what's passed, and there's still 2 nights, a possible Layt al-Qadr. Don't go easy. Just a quick reminder, since we have maybe an extra couple minutes, not doing a Surah Al-Kafirun, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala frees every single night people from the hellfire. And this happens till the adhan of Maghrib of the day of Eid. So you do not want to leave any drop of fuel in your tank. Make sure that by the time Maghrib hits of Eid day, on Tuesday night, Maghrib, make sure before that second you've left everything, every ounce of energy, every ounce of dua, anything you can put forward, all put it in Ramadan. And because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can free up people till the last second. And who knows, we don't know, has Allah freed us or not yet. We pray that He has, but we act and behave as He hasn't, and keep striving for His mercy subhanahu wa ta'ala. So please don't go easy. A lot of people on day 30, because Taraweeh is done the night before, 30th day, it's Eid tomorrow, let me go buy, let me go do this. This should have been done before Ramadan, to be honest. If you can do a little bit at a time so that it's not all the last day, like the 30th day of fasting, there is no Taraweeh that night, but know that Ramadan ends at Maghrib. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is listening till the very last second. So put it all on the line. And then just a reminder for myself, first and foremost, and for you, that as soon as Eid enters, the shayateen are released. And shaitan is going to try to ruin everything you have done the past month in matter of seconds or minutes. Literally, they're trying to destroy everything you've built, because we know building things takes time, destroying them takes seconds. And he will try to destroy all of our Ramadan by A, going back to what we were like before Ramadan, or by a word that we say or an action we do. So now that we, inshallah ta'ala, I ask Allah that He's made us or makes us as part of people who have taqwa. Taqwa is to be mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if we come across something we shouldn't have said or done as soon as Eid starts, or after obviously, just take a moment, say istighfar, fix yourself, you've improved inshallah, and move on. Don't let shaitan get between you and others. Very common, the first day of Eid, people fight. It's very common. Shaitan just puts something in between it, as if people didn't come out of Ramadan, and then all of their Ramadan could be compromised. So be very careful, inshallah. Don't lose everything you've built and you've gained in this month. And of course, a sign of acceptance of Ramadan, وَالَّذِينَ اهْتَدَوْا زَادَهُمْ هُدًى وَآتَاهُمْ تَقْوَاهُم. Those who are indeed were guided in Ramadan, the scholars that use this ayah say Allah increases them in guidance and gives them taqwa. So that's a sign. If we're wondering, did Allah accept from us? It's to look at ourselves after Ramadan. How are we after? And this is a sign of acceptance. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from all of us. Jazakumullah khair. Next week, inshallah, I'll announce on the classroom if it's just for sure, if it's after Maghrib on a Tuesday. And please stay tuned with the announcements. If you're not on the Google Classroom, just put your email down so we add you so that at least you get the messages. With that, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Jazakallah khair.